It's the 4th of December 2020 as the year 2020, an eventful one, begins to wind down. Today, we'll be discussing strengthening institutions for governance and accountability in Nigeria. As you all know, that the building blocks of nations that make progress, that are transformative, and are also inclusive, are the roles of institutions and how they help to support that aspiration. With me to lead this conversation is Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare. He's the Deputy Director of the Socio-Economic Rights Accountability Project, SERAP, a leading civil society organization in Nigeria that demands accountability and transparency from government at all levels, even the private sector. Good morning and nice to have you once again on the show.
Good morning, Ottoabasi.
Yes. Yes. To viewers, the three-point role of SERAP as a CSO is advocacy, publications on issues that have to do with governance, accountability, and of course the socio-economic rights of Nigerians, and also where it is required, they go to courts to demand that accountability. 2020 has been a very busy year for SERAP, Mr. Kolawole, and I'll just take you up first in terms of how critical institutions are to an evolving democracy like Nigeria. A former minister said one of the challenges in Nigeria is that the institutions are weak. They're not strong enough to carry out their roles. When I talk about institutions, even the principle of rule of law, we have the Judiciary, which is supposed to be very strong and robust. We have, even across the financial space, the central banks, the institutions responsible for anti-corruption roles, even the institutions that are responsible for effective regulations across the public and private sector levels. So how critical are institutions to an evolving democracy like Nigeria?
Okay, I was a mute then. We need to understand what it means to evolve before we go into institutions.
All right.
And I'm happy that you have mentioned some very important institutions which I would classify as, I would like to look at this from the arms of government that we have in Nigeria. The judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. Now, these very important arms, even as they go through the 3 tiers of government, comprises of various institutions that ought to make them work the way they are designed to. So you mentioned the CBN, for instance, which would more or less be as part of the executive, even though it's a financial regulator and a big player in the Nigerian economy. How strong is that institution? What are the legal frameworks that can support it? And to whom ultimately is it responsible? Those are those questions that build strong institutions, not necessarily a strong building, like we've seen a former chairman of the SEC during an interview. And so, when we think evolving, where are we going? And it's very important to look at that to be able to say whether we've evolved at all or where we've evolved to. So the democracy started in 1999, and that's more than 21 years by my reckoning. And with that, the various administrations can go. And what is the effect of their governance side, structure, and policy on the institutions they created, or the ones they made by virtue of the National Constitution? I would say that for what we've seen so far, we have not fared well in the sense of evolving to the better as a nation with our institutions in advancing democracy. So let's look at the judiciary, for instance, which is a very key part of the arms of government. We have the various court structures. We have the various even agencies like the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies that are meant to push the ante of jurisprudence, if I can call it that. And those are, this is just to mention a few. The Supreme Court is the apex court. And the constitutional framework that regulates how a judge ends up at the Supreme Court and builds all these things to make sure that the courts answer to the Constitution and not to the president. And so we talk about the legislative too. We talk about the legislature too, the legislative arm of government, which is itself is made up of various institutions too. The National Assembly being a prime a member of that area. And so while are these institutions fair, can we say we've seen a difference or a move forward from 1999 till this as part of building that institution? I would say no. And it does not necessarily mean that those institutions do not have the right legal framework. It is the way we have made those frameworks work, or the way, in another way of saying it, we have made them not to work that made them weak. We can talk about the police. It's a good instance to put it in proper context. The police are part of the executive. How have they said? Talk about the army. And we've seen the army say that, and what we've seen in these various structures of government is we see a certain kind of allegiance, if I can call it that, to the president, which should not be. Institutions are answerable to the people through the instrumentality of the highest law of the land, the constitutions, and the various laws that set them up. So in the first place, once we have executive or public officers heading each of these agencies who believe that the allegiance is owed to either the president or the party structure that brought them forth, appointed them or elected them, then it's a misnomer. And that would definitely not fare well for those institutions. So for the anti-corruption agencies, that's another aspect we should look at. The ICPC, the FCC, the police, the CCTV, that's the Code of Conduct Bureau, the NFIU, and the various structures we have to fight corruption. How aware are they that they are institutions that are answerable to the people through the Constitution and not to the president? But events have shown that all these institutions and structures have not fared well the way they should, because there is a misnomer that the answer to whoever is the president at the point in time, and not the laws of the land which are set in place to guide everyone, including the president. So if you ask me, how important is institutions, strong institutions, to the evolving democracy in Nigeria? Yes, the answer is they are very important to ensure that democracy, which we practice for over 20 years now, should have been on its way. We don't expect it to be perfect yet, but it should have improved. And I have seen no improvement. And which takes us to the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 16 talks about strong institutions. Nigerians have signed on to this, and we are yet to see it. And it's very important that one of the targets of Goal 16, the Sustainable Development Goals, talks about transparency in governance. How transparent are the various structures of government, and even these institutions that we are saying they ought to be strong in themselves. So for what we do at SERAP has sent over 200 freedom of information requests this year alone. And you will be interested to know that out of these over 200, the rate of response is less than 10%. And the rate of positive response is even abysmally low, much more worse. So if institutions themselves are not transparent as to how they are run and governed, and even in their spending and expenditure, how can they hope to survive or to be better at what they do? So if an institution is doing wrong, for instance, who will tell that institution what are the checks and balances put in place by law to make sure that it functions the way it should, it's accessible to the people? And when it ends, how are we to correct the situation? And so we have administrations come and go, we have CEOs come and go, senior public officers come and go, and everything and every time these institutions are weakening, that they are not able to stand up to do what they should do within the sphere of democracy.
Yeah. I mean, you've raised some
fundamental points about the fact that even though we've had about 20 years of democracy, the significant progress we need has not been really felt in terms of the roles institutions should play. But what really caught my attention very seriously was the fact that institutions should work for the country, in the overall interest of citizens, and not that loyalty issue to the president. In very strong democracies like the US and UK, you see how institutions are there to ensure that the state and the interest of the state is preserved and not the interest of who is in the corridors of power. So I want to ask you, for example, when it has to do with the judiciary, this notion of having an Attorney General and Minister of Justice. I know that there have been discussions around the fact that it should be a role separated whereby the Attorney General can really represent fully the interests of citizens and the state at the federal and even at the state level. And then maybe the Minister of Justice or Commissioner of Justice is an appointee of government. Have we not come to that time in reviewing our whole jurisprudence and constitutional provision for that? Because when you look at what's happening in democracies like the US, you can have the Attorney General take his own stand clearly from evidence and investigations, even though it's at loggerheads with the president. We rarely see that in Nigeria.
You made the point also about it. And that is what we've not seen. There has been a lot of clamor for this. Right from 1999, when we got the Constitution, people are saying the way it has fared, even right under the Obasanjo administration, that we need to separate those roles. And this has nothing to do with the personalities who are appointed as Attorney General, either at the federal level or the state. No, it's about the functionality of that office. And now the Constitution has set up that office, irrespective of who is there, not to function as it ought to be, and to weaken the institution as it were. I'm happy that there is a constitutional review process ongoing presently. And I want to believe this should be one of the issues on the table. I've seen the notice put out by the House of Representatives and the Senate, and I've seen the issues they've listed. And at points and time and again, I have to tell Nigerians that those issues submitted by the National Assembly is not binding on all Nigerians. They are just a guide. So all Nigerians are free to bring up issues that they see needs amendment. And this point you made is one of those very important ones in the interest of all Nigerians. We should have Attorney General separate from, it should not be a political appointee. The way it's structured presently in the Constitution, it just stands to reason that office cannot function. Again, irrespective of whosoever is at the helm of affairs at the Attorney General's office. Ultimately, the Attorney General is meant to answer to the people. He's the chief law officer of Nigeria. He is the guardian, the custodian, if I can call it that, of the Constitution. Who even tells the president when the president errs against the Constitution that no, this is not what the law says. But when such an Attorney General is appointed by the president as a minister and more or less a political functionary, what do you expect? And that is what we've seen over the years. And that is why, even right from the onset of democracy in 1999, we've seen this constant clamor and advocacy. And SERAP has done quite a lot of that too, to see the Attorney General's roles clearly separated. If we have the Minister of Justice, who we can call the legal advisor to the president in terms of what he does, separate from the office of the Attorney General, the two roles will be different. So we have the minister who speaks for the government, and we have the Attorney General who acts for the people. And that in itself is the beauty of democracy. It creates that balance, that checks and balances, so that the people know that we have someone at the helm of affairs who interprets the law. But what we've seen in Nigeria is unfortunate. That just like Sarah, we have a lot of judgments against the government. And we have a senior lawyer, the Attorney General, who comes to the public to defend why judgments of court should not be enforced. It shouldn't be. If it was the Minister of Justice that said that, and we have to say Attorney General challenging him, if we have the rules different, it would have been understandable. But here we have Attorney General, who is the custodian of the law, who becomes the chief maker of the law by not enforcing judgments of the court. Insofar, the same Attorney General participated in the proceedings of the court, and so you cannot claim ignorance of the judgment that has been given. We have a lot of judgments that we've had against the government, and we've been forwarded and which we are yet to see action on. So it will be very important from the constitutional review process, if we can have these rules separated. It is for the beauty of democracy and for the betterment of all Nigerians.
Definitely,
we look forward to seeing that happen, because it will really, like you said, strengthen our democratic process and ensure that we have a very strong institution that helps to keep checks on the other arms, the legislature and the executive. That's from the judiciary part. But let's look at what you've been doing. I mean, remarkable work of ensuring that there's transparency in governance. We've seen the session looking at the issues of MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies, and addressing the issues of corruption, whereby people get allocations, budget allocations, but do not make any returns in terms of how they spend the money. And it was surprising to see that even since the period of 2014, 2015, even 2016, some MDAs never returned back or even made any justification of how they spent what was allocated to them. As at that time, there was about over 60. I think recently, Boji talked about the fact that there are 11 now. But in terms of the MDAs and accountability in how they spend what has been allocated to them in terms of budgetary allocations, and of course, that which has become a very big concern, are you seeing some improvement in the responses of the government? For example, the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, the Accountant General's Office and the Attorney General's Office. Are we seeing more cooperation in ensuring that the ministries or MDAs that were identified in that report of the Auditor General, which you've highlighted, come on board and ensure that they are more transparent as expected?
Unfortunately, also, I would not be able to answer in the affirmative as to whether we've seen any remarkable progress. That is yet to be seen, and that is yet to be in the public space. You recall that SERAP, as part of what we do, recently had a public forum where we put this forward as one of the issues that should be on the front burner of the public discourse. Why would we have ministries, departments, and agencies receive funds, millions of naira, year on year, and not being able to account for how those funds are spent and retire any excess, if any? That is not normal. That should not be in any democracy. And that definitely goes to the heart of the discussion we've been having about having strong institutions. It is not the absence of laws, as it were, that have not made these NDAs to retire those funds or to give accounts for those funds. It is the absence of those various structures that have been put up, which I would agree is not perfect, to even put up some amount of work to do what they have been set up to do. You have mentioned the Office of the Accountant General. You have mentioned the Office of the Secretary of Government of the Federation. You have mentioned the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation, who, by provisions of the Constitution, is at the heart of accountability of government funds. But what have we seen? We have seen the Auditor General do his work by publishing the audit reports of these agencies and come out to say that we have agencies, MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies of government who have not published, who have not retired funds or given account for how they spend funds. But that report, as beautiful as it is still incorrect and very incomplete, because we are yet to know the names of those MDAs, which would have been the beauty of that job well done by the Office of the Auditor General. But by giving us figures and amounts, more than 800 billion naira that is yet to be remitted or accounted for, and not mentioning the agencies, is a job done halfway. You would agree with me that Nigerians deserve to know governance is being held on behalf of the people. These persons who work in these ministries, departments, and agencies, hold such powers as public officers, whether appointed or elected, are on behalf of the Nigerian people. So we've not seen that. But what we've seen so far from the report of the Auditor General itself is that we have a lot of agencies who do not remit at all, while we have some who do part accounting. And so what we need to do is to strengthen the Office of the Auditor General to be able to do this work. So what we do as part of our advocacy is to ensure that we have a legislation, which is the Audit Act. It is unfortunate that the last one that was passed was not assented to by the president, which I find so also very interesting. The president did not return it. He did not give ratings as provided by the Constitution, and did not give access until the 8th National Assembly. And we've been expecting the 9th National Assembly to do the needful. I understand the legislature of the way, but we are looking forward to making sure that the legislation comes out to do what is required to do. To strengthen the Office of the General to be able to do its work, to hold ministries, departments, and agencies accountable. That again goes to what we've been talking about. Who is the Auditor General answerable to? Definitely not the president, even though he's appointed by the president. He is accountable to the people of Nigeria who are given such powers under Section 82, 83 of the Constitution to do his work. And then there was the legal framework that punishes any agency that runs foul of the law. But what we've seen so far in practice, there are laws, there are infractions, but there's no punishment. It's an interesting perspective I'll point out to you, Ottoabasi, that as part of the various frameworks released by the federal government as part of the response to COVID-19, we have one principal one from the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, from the presidency, highlighting nothing less than 10 issues of how COVID-19 funds will be expended, including providing for punitive action. And I will recall that particular framework says that MDAs must respond to freedom of information requests as at when due within 7 days as provided by the Freedom of Information Act, and that erring MDAs and public officers who default will have their names published. We are yet to see that, Ottoabasi. We are yet to see it. We have sent out only less than 100 FYs on COVID-19 alone, with no particular response.
We sent to the CBN, the NCDC, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, to the state governors, and we're yet to get a response, except for very few responses. And none has been the positive, except from the office of the Attorney General, which gave us some kind of funds that we spent and those that are retired. That is not good enough. And so it shows you that this is endemic. It is not related only to the Auditor General's report alone. This is even happening with COVID-19 funds.
That shows again the challenge of, like you said, strengthening institutions, because if you have the Attorney General separated from Minister of Justice, they should be empowered to really, really ensure that these institutions in government respond to those FOIs or all those demands made, because it's very important. We can't have government where there's no accountability, and yet people are paying taxes, and yet people are required to also abide by the principles and rule of governance.
And what lack of transparency and accountability does to government is really, really appalling. And I hope government realizes what this does. We have a huge trust deficit that we have even government officials to refer to time and again. But the question is, what has government done to reduce that trust deficit? What has government done to reduce that gap and to build trust? The step would be to be transparent with information, timely information. And like I do always say, we have the Ministry of Information dedicated to practicing what is provided in Section 39 of the Constitution. We receive information from the people and disseminate information to the people. But we have not seen that ministry fare any better than all the other MDAs. We have a 2020 budget. How has it spent? Who has gotten what? How has it been spent? Who is making sure that you that got money to perform an obligation really performs it as expected and as well that when due and that is retired? That is what we've not seen. And so we have to, so like I said, it's not the absence of a legal framework. The Freedom of Information Act, to my mind, is one of the best pieces of legislation that has come out in Nigeria in recent times. But how has it fared? Even the Attorney General that is constitutionally that is empowered by Section 31 of the Freedom of Information Act to gather and collate data of FOI requests, the responses given, and the reasons for declining information itself defaults in responding to freedom of information requests. So if the custodian is defaulting, so like they said, who watches the watchers? So in the absence of transparency, it gives room for what governments like to call fake news. And in some cases, they call it hate speech. When you don't give credible, true information out, you leave it to perceptions, and then mischief makers are free to run around town with fake news. But why can't we have the real deal in the open? Why do we have to go to court? Ottoabasi, we have more than 25 cases in court presently on freedom of information requests. Don't forget, these cases is not saying that government is corrupt. These cases is because government is resisting SERAP's request for information. And that is not good enough. Not at all in a democracy.
So, Kolawole, what would you be saying, one or two things you'd like to see happen quickly that can really improve these institutions building and, of course, accountability that can strengthen our democracy and, of course, economy at large?
Transparency and accountability. Transparency and accountability is a watchword. It is not the absence of legal frameworks. The legal frameworks are not perfect, we agree. But it's transparency and accountability in the running of these agencies that would show us the loopholes in the legal framework that we need to fix. It is all about being transparent, being accountable to the people and not to the president. Once we have that in place, things will fall in line.
Definitely. If we
reform the constitution effectively and make the institutions work for the interest of the nation and not for the interest of the president, definitely we would see engendering of our democracy and the economy. Because in very, what we call type A democracies, institutions can disagree with the president, but governance must continue and the democratic process must continue. The US, the UK, and countries like France are good examples of how institutions are helping to build their democracy and economy. And definitely Nigeria We must not be left out from that. We must continue that advocacy, which CSOs like SERAP and the rest are doing. And thank you very much, Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, for the time. I know that so much cases in court, so much of requests for accountability, transparency, and we urge you and other CSOs doing this service to continue in that regard to ensure that we can bring governments at all levels and even the private sector accountable, transparent, serving the citizens and overall interest of Nigerians. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And that would be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. You can join the conversation. You can send your views and comments on the challenges of transparency and accountability in Nigeria and what you want to see happen more that can make the institution stronger to make Nigeria's democracy work and its economy inclusive. Send your views and comments to news@proshareng.com. You can follow at SERAP Nigeria on latest developments on what they're doing to also bring transparency and accountability from the federal to state level and across board, and also various seminars and publications they have in that regard. On our website, you can log on to www.proshareng.com. On that website, you can see developments around accountability, where we have articles from the political space to the Nigerian economy, and of course, issues around scandals and frauds and governance. We cover them all, and they are there on a very rich website with contents. To come your way again, this is wishing you a very lovely weekend as we wrap up our programming for this week. A lovely weekend, and hope to see you next week, one day. To come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice day and stay safe.